guys? Welcome to another video. Today I'm reviewing Stranger Things Volume 1. This TV show came out on Friday and was directed by the Duffer Brothers and stars Finn Wolfhard and Millie Bobby Brown. Now before we start, with the like button, subscribe, the post notification bell so you know for every video, and let's just start. So this is going to be a very, very long video. I will put the time slots for the different episodes just in case if you want to skip forward and watch any other episode that you want. So let's start off with episode 1. And episode 1 is called The Hellfire Club. Now I thought the recap of the previous seasons, I thought it gave a great recap because of course I wasn't going to watch all 3 seasons. I didn't have time to watch all 3 seasons before this one, and the recap was perfect. The opening sequence was great. I thought it was a great way to start off this season. It was basically the backstory with Dr. Brenner, or Papa, and the children in the special mental ward. It is a terrifying sequence. There's a terrifying mental ward massacre sequence where it shows the aftermath of it, and 11 just kills all the children and the doctors. It is very, very unsettling and a great way to start off this season because this is definitely by far the darkest season of Stranger Things. One of the sequences picks up right after the end of season 3 with 11, Will, Jonathan, Joyce, and Argyle, who's played by Eduardo Franco, which I really enjoyed Argyle's character. He's funny, he's a fun character, and a great sort of friend to Jonathan, and I think it works perfectly. There's also a great continued 80s feel to the season. Now, of course, the kids are grown up, and I think that this TV show did a great job with continuing that 80s feel because it is still fun. It still has the fun, even though this is the darkest of the seasons. It still captures the fun of the previous 3 seasons. There's also a great continued relationship between all the kids. Of course, they were all split up, and when they all get back together, it's fantastic. I thought that they had a great relationship between each other. There's also a great relationship between Dustin and Susie. Susie does appear in this TV show, or in this season, I would say twice, 2 or 3 times, and she's a fun character. Her and Dustin, they're very fun. There's also a great continued relationship between Steve and Robin. I thought Steve was awesome in this TV show, in this season. Steve is one of my favorite characters. Robin is a very good character, and her relationship to Steve is continued very, very well done. Max and Lucas, their relationship is handled very well. Max doesn't like Lucas for the majority of this episode, and I thought it works because it adds sort of that tension between those 2 characters. Of course, they don't like each other now, but Lucas is trying to become better friends with Max, of course, but obviously Max doesn't like Lucas anymore. So I thought it works very, very well. And of course, by the end of the season, they do become friends again, and I think it works very, very well. The Hellfire Club. Now, the Hellfire Club is awesome. It's basically this outcast club in the school which everyone thinks they're freaks. Mike, Dustin, and Lucas are in the Hellfire Club. The leader is Eddie Munson, played by Joseph Quinn, and Eddie Munson is easily my favorite character in this entire show, or this entire season. He is by far the best character in the entire season. He's funny. He's sort of creepy at times, but he's not overly creepy like one of the characters, which I'll get to later. The return of Murray. I thought Murray, played by Brett Gelman, is fantastic in the season. He has a lot to do in the season, more than what he does in season 3, and I think it works fantastic. There's also a great relationship between Nancy Wheeler, played by Natalia Dyer, and Jonathan Byers, played by Charlie Heaton. I thought the relationship was continued very, very well throughout this season. There's also a great conversation between Eddie Munson and Chrissy. Chrissy is a cheerleader. This is a new character, so is Eddie Munson. But Chrissy is a new character in this episode, and she's played by Grace Van Dyne, and they both knew each other in middle school. And there is some tension between them, which leads to later things in this season, of course, with crimes and murders, and I think it was very, very well done. There's also a great relationship. Since Eddie and Chrissy knew each other from middle school, and they knew each other before this year, there's one character in this TV show that, of course, doesn't like Eddie Munson, and things happen to those characters, which of course get to later in the later episodes, but I thought it was perfect. There's also a terrifying sequence in Eddie's house with Chrissy. Chrissy sees Vecna, And this is one of the first encounters, or I believe it is the first encounter with Vecna. Vecna is horrifying. I When I saw the trailers for this season, I didn't think Vecna was sort of a great villain to be in season 4 of Stranger Things, just because it sort of resembles a human, I guess. It's more human than the other villains that we've had and the other ones with the Demogorgons. But I was very, very wrong. Vecna is horrifying in this TV show, and especially in this season. Um, there are also many hilarious sequences, mainly with the kids and Erica. Erica is Luca's sister, played by Pia Ferguson. She is very, very funny in this entire season. There's also many tense sequences. I felt that the tension in this episode was very, very well done. It kept me on the edge of my seat the entire time. The score by Kyle Dixon, very good. I thought it was a great score. It feels a little bit like the Child's Play score, which I love the Child's Play score because it is sort of creepy and very unsettling, and they use that sort of similar feel to Child's Play to this episode, and I thought it worked perfectly. There's also a terrifying ending sequence. It is one of the most horrifying ending sequences of any Stranger Things show. Vecna contorts Chrissy's body in Eddie's house, and it cuts to black. Her body is just contorting. She's floating in the air. It is one of the creepiest and most terrifying sequences that I've ever seen in this show. That's all for episode 1. Now let's move on to episode 2. So episode 2 is called Vecna's Curse. Now the opening sequence, I thought it was great. It was a great opening sequence. It's basically how Hopper survived the explosion. He jumped before the Russian machine exploded. And everyone knew Hopper was going to survive because in the end of season 3, the very, very end, the Russians say that they have the American, and there's only one person that it could be, Hopper. And he survives, of course, and the way he survives, he jumps off, which I think it works because he did have time before the thing exploded, and obviously he wasn't going to just stay there and die. So I thought the opening sequence was great. There's also a great police sequence. The police find Chrissy's body, who's dead in Eddie's house, and I'll get to Eddie a little bit later on, but this is one of the main reasons why Eddie is starting to be blamed for Chrissy's death. There's also great interaction between Eleven, Mike, and Will. I thought Eleven, Mike, and Will have one of the strongest relationships, especially Mike and Will, and Eleven and Mike. Eleven and Will are getting along more in this episode, and I think it works perfectly. There's also great interaction between Steve and Robin. They have this one sequence in a movie store, and I thought it was perfect. I really enjoyed that sequence, and it really developed those characters more. Chrissy's death is on the news, and everyone is in chaos just because of this one death. And I think it works because there are many perspectives to who killed Chrissy, what happened to Chrissy, and you do get into that in the later episodes. But I think starting off like this, where it was on the news and everyone's being, there's all confusion, I thought it was perfect. The relationship between Murray and Joyce Byers, I thought they had a great relationship. Of course, Murray and Joyce Byers were, of course, knew each other from season 3, but they continue their relationship in this episode, of course, mainly to help Hopper, and I think it was perfect. There's also an intense torture sequence. Jim is tortured by the Russians. It is one of the most intense torture sequences that I've seen in the season, or in this show so far. And it's also a very saddening torture sequence because, of course, Jim Hopper is one of my favorite characters in the entire show, and him being tortured by the Russians was very, very unsettling. The 80s roller skating sequence, I thought it was a great sequence. It's fun until Eleven starts getting bullied by Angela, which it is a great transition from fun to sort of a bit sad because Angela is mentioning Eleven's father and Hopper and all that, and it does get a bit sad for her character. Chrissy's boyfriend, who is Jason Carver, played by Mason Dye, is interrogated by the police, and he thinks that Eddie Munson was the one who killed Chrissy. And he just obviously goes out, tries to find Eddie Munson after, and Eddie Munson has started being blamed by every single person except the Hellfire Club about Chrissy's death. And I think it was perfect because it does add that next level of intensity because you don't know what's going to happen to Eddie Munson's character, how they're going to find him, what's going to happen. So I thought it was perfect. There's also a hilarious interaction between Jonathan Byers and Argyle. They're playing golf. They're in this deserted place. Of course, beat up cars. They're just playing golf. Jonathan stressing out about Nancy Byers, and I thought the relationship between Argyle and Jonathan in this sequence was great. They have a great friendship, and I think it works perfect. There's also a creepy backstory, very creepy backstory about Victor Creel, who was Eddie Munson's uncle, told the story of Victor Creel to Nancy, and this was when Nancy was trying to interview the uncle about Chrissy's death. The backstory for Victor Creel for right now is horrifying. Victor Creel looks terrifying. Robert Englund is one of my favorite horror actors of all time, of course, Freddy Krueger, and he brings that to Victor Creel, and he is terrifying. The clock ticking sequence is very creepy and unsettling. There are a lot of clocks in this season, and it's all horrifying. The clocks, once you hear that clock sound in the one sequence, it just continues throughout the entire season, and it's very, very terrifying. 11 violently hits Angela in the head with roller skates. So, 11 obviously had enough of Angela. Angela was bullying her, and 11 hits her with a roller skate, but she hits her with obviously the wheels, and it is one of the most violent sequences in the season because it's just very abrupt, and it's warranted for 11, but a lot of the people in that roller skating now see 11 as a monster, and I think it worked perfectly. Vecna is once again horrifying. The house of Vecna is in the Upside Down, which I thought was perfect because, of course, the Upside Down is where everything creepy, everything terrifying is down there. And I think it works because Vecna is easily one of the most powerful and most creepy characters in Stranger Things. There's also terrifying imagery, especially the police with Nancy in the car. The guy with Nancy in the car sees the police as a creepy monster with claws on its face, and I thought the imagery was fantastic. It was very, very creepy. And the ending sequence, I thought it was great. It was a great ending sequence. It's basically Vecna in the Upside Down. It shows Vecna lowering itself and shows it in the Upside Down, then cuts to black. Very, very good ending sequence. That's all for episode 2. Now let's move on to episode 3. So episode 3 is called The Monster and the Superhero. So the opening sequence, I thought it was good. It was a good return of Dr. Owens, played by Paul Reiser. He was from season 2. Of course, he was helping one of the characters in season. He was helping Bob try to escape. Of course, Bob dies, but he was the one helping Bob, and he was talking to the military about Chrissy and trying to find 11 because he wants to find 11. It looks like he wants to help her, but we'll really see what he wants to do later on. The hilarious car sequence, there's a hilarious car sequence with 11, Mike, Will, Jonathan, Argyle. Those 5 characters together are very, very funny. There's also a great dinner sequence with Joyce, Murray, Will, Mike, 11, Argyle, and Jonathan. Great dinner scene. They're having sort of a weird conversation about Russians and all of that, and I thought it was very, very well done. And of course, Argyle really has no clue what's going on. There's also an awesome sequence with 11 dreaming of Vecna rising in its own house. Vecna is, once again, like I said, terrifying. And 11 is starting to have these dreams about Vecna, and they're all terrifying in their own way. Lucas, Jason, and the other basketball guys hunt Eddie Munson, so now those guys are hunting Eddie Munson, and which they still blame Eddie for Chrissy's death. He is still blamed by basically everyone for Chrissy's death. And Jason Carver, who is of course the boyfriend of Chrissy, he goes further and basically wants to kill Eddie because he thinks Eddie killed Chrissy. And it adds another level of tension because you don't know what's going to happen to Eddie's character. The relationship between Eddie, Steve, Dustin, Robin, and Max is great. I really enjoyed the relationship between those 5 characters. 11 does get arrested in this episode because Angela does develop a concussion from the ice skating rink incident, where of course 11 hit Angela in the head with the rollerblade, and I thought it worked very, very well. The relationship between Hopper and Enzo, I thought it was a great relationship. Enzo is the Russian guard. Enzo gets his money if he helps Hopper, and of course that's what's going to happen because Enzo is a Russian, and that's what's going to happen. And I thought the relationship was very, very well done in this episode. There's also a great continued relationship between Dustin, Robin, Max, Steve, and Nancy. I thought those 5 characters had a great relationship, and they are very, very they're together throughout a lot of the episodes because of things that happen to those 5 characters. There's also a hilarious car conversation between Dustin and Steve, who's talking about Steve and Nancy, and Steve gets annoyed. And I thought it was fun. It was a fun sequence. Dustin and Steve have a great relationship, a great friendly relationship in this episode, and I thought it works very, very well. Hopper in Russia is at times very brutal. Of course, you don't want to see this happen to Hopper, but it does, and it is very, very brutal. There's also a good conversation relationship between Dr. Brenner and Eleven, who Dr. Brenner was, of course, Eleven's doctor. Well, of course, Eleven's doctor, but in sort of a child psychiatric ward for like special children who have special powers. And it's a good conversation. Dr. Brenner tries to convince Eleven to stay. Dr. Brenner is, of course, a horrible person, a terrible person, and he does eventually convince Eleven to stay in the hospital. The ending sequence, I thought it was good. Max is basically in the Upside Down, and she's near the creepy clock, and she sees Vecna, and that is another glimpse of Vecna that we get, and I really enjoyed that ending sequence. Now let's move on to episode 4, and episode 4 is called Dear Billy. The opening sequence, I thought it was good. Dr. Owen's friend, they speak to Mike, Will, and Jonathan about Eleven, and there's also a hilarious school sequence with Steve, Dustin, Max, Robin, and Nancy, where they almost attack Lucas. I thought it was a good opening sequence and a great way to start off this episode. Max's visions are terrifying. Once again, her visions are horrifying. The clock, and she reveals that she actually saw Chrissy's death. It is terrifying. There's also a great conversation between Dustin, Steve, and Lucas about Vecna. They have a in-depth conversation about Vecna and what Vecna is. And I thought it was very interesting to how the Duffer Brothers created Vecna and the whole backstory of Vecna. There's also a great continued relationship between Murray and Joyce. Murray and Joyce, of course, constantly looking for Hopper because, of course, Hopper's lost in Russia. And they're constantly finding ways to get to Russia to find Hopper. There's also a great continued relationship between Mike and Will. Mike and Will do sort of break off their friendship for a little bit. But of course, they rekindle their friendship by the end of this episode. Argyle is once again hilarious. He works at Surfer Pizza, which is very random, but seems like the type of job that Argyle would have, and he's very funny in this episode. There's also a hilarious meeting sequence with Robin and Nancy with the head of the mental hospital. They asked to see Victor Creel because Victor Creel is one of the main players, played by Robert Englund, who is horrifying. One of the main characters in this episode from this episode on. And it's really funny because Robin and Nancy, they tried to schedule this meeting with the head of the mental hospital, which you can't really get unless you're certified, and it was a very, very funny sequence. Yuri, played by Nicola DeJerico, is hilarious. Yuri is one of the most funny characters in this entire show. I didn't think he was going to be that funny. I thought it was going to be an annoying Russian character. But by the end of the season, I really enjoyed his character, and he is very, very funny. There's also an awesome fight between the Russian soldier and Hopper, an awesome Hopper escaping Russian gulag sequence. Hopper does try to escape the Russian gulag, and it's awesome. I really enjoyed that entire sequence. There's also a terrifying sequence with Max and her mother. The mother, it looks like a good sequence where Max is going back to her mother, and they're having a good conversation until the mother turns into Vecna, and the house turns into the Upside Down. So really, Max was in the Upside Down the whole time, and it was horrifying. It was very, very creepy, and I think it works perfectly. Victor Creel, played by Robert Englund, is terrifying. He is one of the most horrifying characters in this entire season. Number one, he doesn't have any eyes. His eyes are shut, and he just looks creepy. The way he speaks is creepy. Robert Englund is fantastic. He is phenomenal in this show. It reminds me a little bit of Freddy Krueger because of that creepiness aspect, and of course the children, and I think it works very, very well. And his backstory is horrifying. There's also a creepy and sad backstory of Victor Creel. While his backstory is horrifying, it is also sad. His entire family is murdered by Vecna, and the way they depict that in the backstory sequence was great. There's also a great conversation between Mike and Will. Mike and Will continue their strong friendship in this episode, but of course it is weakened by that ice skating or by the roller skating rink sequence, but it is still pretty strong. There's also an awesome shootout sequence in Will's house. There is a shootout sequence in Will's house where Argyle arrives just in time to save Mike and Will and Jonathan and the FBI agent because some other people who I think work for Dr. Brenner are in there trying to shoot at them, and the FBI agent does finally escape with those three characters. Yuri does betray Enzo, Hopper, Joyce, and Murray, and I think it works because Yuri seemed like that type of person to betray them, and Yuri was a bad guy from the beginning, and you could see that he was a bad guy, but I actually thought that he would actually try to help them, but I think it was a good little mini twist. There's also an emotional cemetery sequence where Max does talk to Billy about life after his death, and Max does enter the upside down in that sequence. And the entire sequence was very emotional because Billy did eventually become one of my favorite characters in the show when he died, because of course it showed that he still cared about his sister Max, and I think it works very, very well. There's also a creepy upside down cemetery sequence where Vecna, in the form of dead Billy, talks to Max. The show just gets more creepy and terrifying as you progress from each episode. Vecna is very, very creepy in this episode. The upside down looks awesome and terrifying. It's basically red. There are clocks floating upside down. Of course, hence the name Upside Down. But the clocks are floating upside down. Everything's floating in the air, and it looks creepy. And if you can picture yourself in that sequence and picture yourself in Max's shoes, you would be terrified. And the ending sequence, I thought it was good. Max does escape Vecna and escapes the upside down, which I thought it was a good ending sequence. And it works because, of course, you didn't want to see Max in that position anyway. That's all for episode 4. Now to move on to episode 5. And episode 5 is called The Nina Project. There's the opening sequence, I thought it was good. It's basically Mike, Will, Argyle, and Jonathan trying to save the Bloody Police. There's also a good reveal of Dr. Owens, who is working with Dr. Brenner, and they're working on 11 to see continue research on her powers. And Dr. Owens he's sort of an anti-hero, because he does have sort of that good where he doesn't want to see 11 being tortured, but he does have that sort of bad side to him where he does want to experiment on 11 to see to look up on her powers. The first meeting sequence with 11 and Dr. Brenner, I thought it was a good sequence. This is one of the first times that they've seen each other since season 2. Dr. Brenner is still evil, and Dr. Owens is sort of semi-evil, like I just stated. He sends 11 back to the Rainbow Room, which of course the Rainbow Room is not a place that 11 wants to go back to, and I thought it worked perfectly. Mike's parents are hilarious. I really enjoyed Mike's parents and their relationship with each other, and the conversations that they have with the kids. They're awesome in this episode. Peter Ballard. Now, Peter Ballard is one of my favorite characters in this entire season. The reason is he is one of the most terrifying, if not the most terrifying character, other than Vecna, actual character in this entire show. The entire Stranger Things show, he is the most terrifying character that I've ever seen. He looks terrifying. Jamie Campbell Bower plays him to perfection. He will haunt my dreams for days. There's also a great sequence with Mike and Will having a conversation about the truth, and of course Mike and Will do have a broken relationship between each other as friends, because 11, they're sort of lying. Mike was sort of lying to 11, and Will knew that, and I think it works very, very well. There's also an emotional sequence where Hopper tells Enzo about his own backstory, and I thought it was very, very well done. It shows that Hopper did have to work all his life, and he was working when he was a kid, and it was just very well done. There's also a good scene where the FBI are searching Eddie Munson's house. They're searching his house. Of course, they do not find Eddie Munson, and I thought it works very, very well. The upside down clock, once again, still terrifying. The noise still haunts me. When you actually see it in the show and you hear the noise in the show, it's very, very creepy and very unsettling. There's also a good scene with Dustin, Steve, Nancy, Max, Robin, and Lucas in the creepy house. The reason I love this house is because it sort of reminded me of Freddy Krueger's house in Nightmare on Elm Street, and I think it worked very, very well because, of course, Robert Englund is back as Victor, is in this show as Victor Creel, and he does have sort of that Freddy Krueger vibe to him. Jason Carver is still looking for Eddie, and he finally finds Eddie, and you sort of don't want anything to happen to Eddie, and you understand why Jason would want to do this, because it does seem that Eddie killed Chrissy, but I think it works very, very well. Steve and Robin are hilarious once again. Max and Lucas are very awkward, but it works perfectly. There's an awesome plane fight sequence with Murray, Joyce, and Yuri. Murray is, of course, trying to fight Yuri because Yuri made a deal with the other Russians that he would turn them in, and Murray does eventually fight Yuri. Patrick's death. Patrick is one of Jason's friends. His death is horrifying. All the deaths by Vecna are sort of similar, but each of them are horrifying in their own way. There's also an awesome ending sequence where Eleven just takes out all the police with her powers, but Dr. Brenner stops her and takes her back into the psychiatric hospital. Eleven goes crazy in that ending sequence. She takes out every single police officer, and it works very, very well. That's all for episode 5. Now let's move on to episode 6. Episode 6 is called The Dive. The opening sequence I thought it was good. The police investigate and now take the blame off of Eddie Munson for a bit and place the blame on Jason since they see Jason with the dead body, and I think it works very, very well. Colonel Sullivan, played by Sherman Augustus, tortures Agent Wallace, who's played by Kendrick Cross. It is unsettling, but if I'm being honest, that sequence I don't really think needed to be included in this episode at all. Dr. Brenner is once again a great villain. He acts friendly to Eleven, therefore being friendly to the audience while doing terrible things to children, which the audience also sees. The police do go back to blaming Eddie Munson for the murders because the town thinks Eddie Munson still did it. Mike, Will, Argyle, and Jonathan do eventually go to Susie's house, and this is one of our first interaction between all the characters and Susie. We actually see Susie physically interacting with other characters, and I think it was very fun. Susie's siblings and Argyle are hilarious. Argyle creates a good relationship, a friendly relationship with Susie's siblings, and it's very, very funny. The Russian gulag sequences are great. The dinner sequence reveals the guards are feeding prisoners in order to fight the Demogorgons, so they're basically fattening up the prisoners in order to fight the Demogorgons and strengthening them. And I thought it was a disgusting dinner scene, and I think it worked very, very well. Peter Ballard, Jamie Campbell Byers, is still terrifying. He constantly makes creepy faces, and they're not, they're natural creepy faces, and that is what is terrifying about his character. He is a great actor and fantastic in this entire show, but he is a bit helpful to Eleven for now. There's also a good reveal of Dustin and Steve finding Eddie Munson in the forest. They do eventually find him, and I thought the rekindling of the friendship between Dustin and Eddie Munson was perfect. Eddie Munson does continue to be one of, if not the best character in this entire season, right next to Steve. I really enjoyed those two characters very, very much. Though they're my favorite characters now in the entire show, and I think that they do have a good relationship between each other, sort of as friends, but not friends some of the times, and I think it works very, very well. The powers test sequence is great. Dr. Brenner forces all the kids in 11 psychiatric hospital to play what he calls a game where they have to use their powers against each other, and I thought it was great. There's also a great continued relationship between Hopper and Enzo, especially when Hopper tells Enzo how they're going to kill the Demogorgon in the Russian gulag. Hopper and Enzo are great. I really enjoyed those two characters, their conversations between each other. Very, very well done. There's also a great wood sequence with Max, Justin, Nancy, Steve, Robin, Lucas, and Eddie. They're going through the woods. Of course, they're trying to help Max, and they're trying to figure out ways to get into the upside down. And I thought it was fantastic. There's also a great scene where Eleven is bullied by 5 kids in the psychiatric hospital. The 5 kids are all using their powers on Eleven. Eleven is being tortured by those 5 kids, and I thought it was very sad to see for Eleven. There's also a great underwater sequences with Steve trying to find the creature. I really enjoy the underwater sequences in this episode. The creature they reveal does go under the water, and I thought it was a great new addition to the character. There's also an awesome sequence where Steve does get dragged underwater all the way to the upside down. Then Nancy, Robin, and Eddie follow him. And the ending sequence I thought it was great. Steve is getting attacked by the flying creatures. We don't know if he's going to die or not because the scene cuts to black after it shows Steve's face. And I thought it was a great ending sequence and keeps you wanting to see the next episode. So that's all for episode 6. Now let's move on to episode 7. And episode 7 is called The Massacre at Hawkins' Lab. So the opening sequence I thought was awesome. Nancy, Robin, and Eddie save Steve from the flying upside down creatures. Yes, Eddie is terrified by these creatures, but he does help Steve. Dr. Brenner does persuade Eleven to stay in the hospital. Um, Dr. Brenner is, once again, like I said, a very horrible character, and he does convince Eleven to stay in the hospital. There's also a great scene with Officer Callahan from season 3. He's hilarious in this episode. He investigates Lucas, Max, and Dustin, and it's a great sequence. There's also a great tension because Steve can die any minute because of his injury from the flying upside down creatures. The upside down creatures all attack him from the side, and they're biting him, and you see the injuries that he has, and you know that he's losing a lot of blood, and he could die any second. There's also a great continued relationship between Eddie, Robin, Steve, and Nancy. Those 4 characters have been together since episode 4 or episode 3, I believe, in the Upside Down now, and they all have to find a way to help each other to escape, and I thought it was perfect. There's also a great continued relationship between Hopper and Enzo. Hopper and Enzo do have a great relationship in this TV show, or in the season. As I said earlier in the last episode, where they're having that conversation about their backstories. There's also a great conversation between Steve and Eddie. They actually become friends. Eddie is sort of that weird guy at the school. Steve was always the popular kid, and they do have a great relationship between each other. Erica, who's Lucas' sister, is hilarious. She is very, very funny. I really enjoyed her character every single time she was on screen. There's also a great reveal where Dustin tells Erica and Lucas that Demogorgons are sort of the soldiers, Vecna is sort of the 5-star general, and Mind Flayer is sort of the head or the top of the entire military. It's obviously not actually the military, but that's the way that they represented them, and I thought it was perfect. Murray does disguise himself as Yuri, and it's hilarious. Murray is hilarious in that sequence. He has this whole Russian accent, and it works perfectly. There's also awesome Russian gulag sequences. The Russian gulag is constant throughout basically every single episode, and of course it has to do with Hopper, and there are some awesome Russian gulag sequences. Peter Ballard, once again, still terrifying, and he does remind me of Pennywise the Dancing Clown. He has that Pennywise look, but he is helpful and warns Eleven that the other kids will try to kill her, and Dr. Brenner will allow it, and it sort of sets up that good relationship between those 2 characters, but of course we'll see what happens when we get into the further of the episodes. Eddie Munson is officially my favorite character of season 4. He is hilarious. The communication sequence with the lights, very funny. Dustin, Lucas, and Erica in the normal house do help Steve, Nancy, Eddie, and Robin in the Upside Down. Eddie Munson he's awesome. He's an awesome character. Of course, he's the main character, the main leader of the Hellfire Club. He is awesome. There's also a great scene with Eleven and Peter Ballard where they help each other escape. I don't know how Jamie Campbell Bower is this creepy in this TV show, because earlier he is very, very creepy. There's also an awesome sequence where the Russian prisoners do work together to kill the Demogorgon. Each of them is killed one by one except Hopper and Enzo. Murray and Joyce do help Enzo and Hopper escape eventually by the end of this scene. There's also an emotional sequence where Joyce does hug Hopper. It's one of the most emotional sequences in this entire show. They reunite once again since the end of season 3, where Hopper supposedly died, and I thought it was very, very emotional. There's also a great scene with Dustin, Lucas, and Erica where they break through the upside down barrier and are able to see Steve, Nancy, Eddie, and Robin through the little barrier, and I thought it was perfect. There's also an awesome sequence where Peter Ballard does reveal that he has the same powers as Eleven. Peter Ballard is revealed to be one of the former patients of Dr. Brenner, and it works very, very well. There's also a great reveal that Vecna did kill Barb, who is Nancy's friend in the very first season, so it does tie back to the original first season where Barb was killed, where Vecna was actually the person that killed Barb. There's also an awesome reveal where Peter Ballard is actually evil, which you could really tell because he just looked very, very creepy. And he killed everyone in the psychiatric hospital. He was the person that killed every single person in that hospital, and it was terrifying. There's an awesome sequence where Nancy was stuck in the Upside Down. She's basically stuck there for a good amount of time in this episode, and I thought it worked very, very well. Because of course, who doesn't want to be stuck? Who wants to be stuck in the Upside Down? It's horrifying. There's also a great reveal that Peter Ballard who is Henry Creel, is of course the son of Victor Creel and the little boy in the flashback of Victor Creel, which was earlier in season 4. So he is actually the son of Robert Englund's character, and it it is a good tie back to Victor Creel's character, because I think Peter Ballard, um, if he wasn't the son of Victor Creel, he would really be a character that was in here for no reason that we spent a lot of time with. So I really enjoyed that explanation for his character. Peter Ballard does tell Eleven's backstory, and Peter Ballard looks and sounds terrifying while he's doing it. Um, I I just really enjoyed Jamie Campbell Bower's character in this episode. He is constantly creepy and constantly terrifying, constantly that character that will make you very creeped out and unsettled. There's also a great reveal that Peter Ballard was Dr. Brenner's first patient. So he was Dr. Brenner's original patient. And I thought it worked because it shows that he was, of course, tortured as a little child by Dr. Brenner, but he has turned into this monster and this very, very creepy guy. There's also an awesome fight sequence where Peter Ballard fights 11. That is one of the most awesome fight sequences in this entire season, maybe this entire show. Peter Ballard does torture 11, which leads to 11 having flashbacks. Then 11 disintegrates Peter Ballard, which leads to Peter Ballard being electrocuted in sort of the realm of the Upside Down, which that entire sequence is longer than that, but it is awesome. There's also a great ending reveal where Peter Ballard is Henry Creel, who is Vecna. So they are all one person. Peter Ballard is Henry Creel, who is the son of Victor Creel, and he's Vecna. That ending reveal was awesome. I really enjoyed the ending of season 4, and I cannot wait for season 4 part 2. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and post notification bell so you know for every video. I'm Peter. Thank you for watching.